Welcome back to OpenLine. We are talking about open records in Tennessee. We have with us Deborah Fisher, the Executive Director of the Tennessee Coalition for Open Government, and just something I think is very important. We have several calls. Let's go to Mary. Mary, hello?
Hello. Yes, I got a question. Okay, so you have a driver's license, and can you still get information about public records?
All right, so you don't have a driver's license. Can somebody who does not have a driver's license still get information about public records?
Yes, yes. Yes, you can. The law does say that the records are available to citizens of the state. So essentially, it allows government entities to ask for some kind of identification that would show that you're a citizen of the state. And the most common method of that is a driver's license. But if the person does not have a driver's license, the law states that other forms of ID can be acceptable. So you may have to provide something else. And usually, if you're in a situation like that, the best thing to do is just to ask the government entity or the custodian of the records, what else can I give you, whether it's, a utility bill or some other ID.
When you talk to a lot of these government agencies, and again, name any government agency. Let's talk about school boards. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of discussion there about someone requests records from a school board. The school board says it's going to cost a lot of money, and there's some back and forth there. But the notion of frivolous requests, of somebody not requesting out of their personal interest, but out of maliciousness to tie up resources. These things, they do take time to fulfill all of these requests. And there is the argument from the other side is, boy, if we just open, if we don't have any restrictions on this, it's just going to, all we're going to be doing is public records requests. When you hear that argument, what do you say?
Well, the first thing is that frivolous is often in the eyes of the beholder, and our law doesn't state that records can only be available for certain purposes. They're available for any citizen. In other words, a government entity can't require you to tell them why you want to see the record. And someone's frivolous request might be another person's way to find out exactly what government is doing. So, I think you have to be very careful about defining frivolous requests based on why the person is asking for the record, because that can quickly go off the rails into, judging something wrongly. But there are people who do make requests who don't go pick them up. They make a lot of requests, never go see them. And actually, the General Assembly this past session dealt with that in the law, and I thought they dealt with it fairly responsibly, and said that if someone makes a request, it makes 2 requests within a 6-month period and doesn't come to pick up those, or never comes to look at those records that were compiled for them after they made the request, and maybe they made an appointment to come see them and they never showed up, and there wasn't a good reason. They didn't call and say something had happened.
Right.
Can you just hold on to them for a couple months for me? Then the government entity may, and this is discretionary, they don't have to, but they may decline to fulfill any more public records requests for that person for a period of 6 months. So they can temporarily sort of stop responding to that person if that person has failed to come look at the records they've requested.
So how often did that happen, do you think?
There really is no data on that. I think what you hear are very anecdotal situations. I think it's pretty rare. But I think it probably does happen sometimes. And I think probably what also happens is someone will make a request and then they'll modify that request. Maybe they don't really know what they're asking for, they don't know the record, or maybe they made a very broad request and then they're narrowing it down. So I've always thought that, and I've told public records requesters this and custodians, the best thing to do is to talk to each other. If you're not sure what you're looking for, talk to the records custodian and try to be specific instead of just so broad that you're going to sweep in a lot of things that you're not really wanting.
Communication is key.
Communication is very important.
I feel like there are times that we go to make a request, and if they would just sit and talk with us for a few moments, we could narrow the request. And when they don't talk to us, it forces our hand to make a very large request.
It does. And it raises the cost for everyone. It's very, just a few minutes on the front end, a good customer service from the government entity to talk with the requester goes a long way.
Let's go to Reverend Fuzz. Hello, Reverend Fuzz.
Hey, man. Listen, I got a question. About 10 years ago, I went out to the school board and asked to see, I was getting requests and complaints from people who were trying to get hired, and I talked to public relations and human resources. I said, well, these people keep coming to me. I need to know why you guys won't hire them. Can we see their records, of why you won't hire them? And we were told that's not public information. All right. Well, later on, I found out that it is public information, and that I could have looked at it, but I was told by the Director of Human Resources it's not public information. My question is this: did she break the law?
It's an interesting question.
Yeah. Well, to really answer that, I'd have to see exactly what the request was, but personnel record or applications for jobs are public record, and if there are written memos or written documents that document why a candidate might not have been hired, that would be a public record. I know of no exemption that would make that off limits. Now, one good thing is that the law was actually changed in 2008, and I don't know when you made your request, but if someone denies access to a record like they did in your case, they actually have to, the government entity has to cite the statute, cite the state law that makes that record exempt. And that's a really important part of the public records law. So if someone just says, well, you can't have them, they actually have to not just say you can't have them or say it's not our policy to not release them, but they actually have to show you the statute or the state law that says that those are confidential.
And all right, that, Reverend Fuzz, I think that's an important point, because you go down there and you say, well, I'm just interested in this. And I'm sure you get a very polite person who says, you know what, we just don't, that's just private information. We don't release that. Then the next response from you or anyone asking should be, okay, that's great. Just cite me the provision in state law that exempts what I'm asking for. And we do that, and sometimes people are taken aback by it. I think sometimes people think things are exempt that are not. And then I think sometimes people just don't want to bother with it. They don't want to do it. And so when you say, okay, you find me the exact provision in state law that exempts this, great, we'll move on. But I think that's a fair question.
Yeah, it's not just a fair, you aren't even supposed to have to ask for it. The law requires them to cite the exemption. And if they don't cite the exemption, they are in violation of the Tennessee Public Records Act.
Now, are some things in regards to hiring, there's some personnel things that are private. Is that true or not? Or is there any part of what he was talking about that sounds...
Well, job applications are open. There have been some exemptions passed that makes certain parts of the applications confidential, and I think those are things like Social Security number, possibly email addresses of the candidate. There are a few things that might be on the job application that might be confidential if there's a driver's license number, but essentially the application is open. Now, I don't know what documents that he was requesting that answered the question of why they weren't hired. It would have to be something that HR maybe filled out, or maybe a letter that was sent to that person. But a government record is essentially presumed to be open unless there's an exemption. And I don't know of any exemption that would make those types of records wholesale closed.
If there's one job and there are 5 people that applied for that job, and there's email discussion or a meeting about who would get the job, that should be open.
Well, if there are records that document the meeting, that would be open. The meeting discussing that is, if it's an HR department, is not going to be open.
Right. All right, Reverend Fuzz, thank you for that call. Yeah, that helps kind of illuminate an issue there. All right, we're going to take a break. If you want to call in, there's the number 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. Take a break. Be back right after this.